The guns fell silent in 1865. The Civil War was over. Yet for millions of Black Americans, freedom was not a triumphant moment. It was only the beginning of a new, uncertain struggle. Across the southern states, cities and towns lay in ruins. Smoke still rose from burned-out homes, and the scarred landscape mirrored the scars of a nation trying to heal. Freedmen and women stepped cautiously into this shattered world. Many had nowhere to go, no land to call their own, and often no family left intact. They faced hostility, hunger, and the constant threat of violence. The promise of freedom written in the Emancipation Proclamation and later the 13th Amendment was real, but it was fragile, contested, and incomplete. Union soldiers, weary from battle, often stayed behind as occupation forces, trying to protect newly freed communities from rising vigilante groups and hostile local authorities. Freed people began forming schools, churches, and communities from the ashes, determined to claim not just survival, but dignity. But the road ahead was treacherous. Sharecropping and labor contracts tied many into cycles of economic dependency. Black codes across southern states sought to limit their rights, enforcing laws designed to replace slavery with controlled servitude. This was a new kind of war, one fought not with muskets, but with courage, perseverance, and hope. It was a fight to define what freedom truly meant: land, work, education, and safety under the law. This story is about that fragile, fiery moment in American history, where freedom was earned not only on battlefields, but in the daily, determined struggle of those who survived the war. Before we go further, hit subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts. The story that unfolds will shock, inspire, and reveal truths often hidden in textbooks, showing the human cost of freedom after the Civil War. The war ended in April 1865. Enslavement, as a legal system, collapsed with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. But freedom did not arrive with land, protection, or economic security. Nearly 1 million formerly enslaved people stepped into a society that had been built to deny them rights. Plantations were abandoned or destroyed. Infrastructure across the South was shattered. Food shortages were common. Families separated by slavery searched desperately for one another, placing ads in newspapers and walking miles across states to reunite. For many, the first act of freedom was simply trying to rebuild family bonds. Yet almost immediately, Southern legislatures moved to control this new labor force. Black codes emerged across states, like Mississippi and South Carolina. These laws restricted movement, limited employment options, criminalized unemployment, and attempted to push freed people back into plantation labor through forced contracts. Vagrancy laws allowed authorities to arrest black men without proof of work and lease them to private employers. Violence intensified the uncertainty. Armed groups and former Confederates resisted federal authority. Freed communities faced intimidation for voting, organizing schools, or asserting independence. Hope and hostility existed side by side. At the same time, freedmen established churches, mutual aid societies, and schools with the support of the Freedmen's Bureau. Education became a powerful symbol of liberation. Land ownership became the ultimate dream. 40 acres and a mule represented economic independence, but most never received it. This period was not a smooth transition. It was a collision between emancipation and resistance. Freedom had been declared, but equality, safety, and true autonomy remained fiercely contested. The Civil War ended on paper. The struggle for real freedom had only begun. Between 1865 and the early years of Reconstruction, freedom was not only defended in courtrooms and legislatures, it was built in fields, cabins, and churchyards. Across the South, newly freed Black Americans moved quickly to create institutions that slavery had denied them. Education became urgent. Within months of emancipation, thousands of makeshift schools opened in rural communities and city basements. With support from Northern missionaries and the Freedmen's Bureau, Black teachers and students filled rough wooden classrooms. Literacy was more than learning to read, it was protection, economic leverage, and political power. Churches rose just as quickly. Independent Black congregations separated from white-controlled denominations, forming spiritual and civic centers. These churches became meeting halls, schools, and organizing hubs. Ministers often doubled as political leaders, encouraging voter registration and civic participation after the 15th Amendment granted black men the right to vote. But progress provoked backlash. White supremacist groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, used intimidation and violence to suppress black political activity. Night raids targeted teachers, ministers, and elected officials. The message was clear: autonomy would be punished. Yet resistance was not passive. In several southern communities, black veterans of the Union Army organized armed self-defense groups to protect families and polling stations. In places like Louisiana, black militias are legally formed under Reconstruction governments. Their existence is often overlooked, but it reveals a critical truth: freedom was guarded by those who had fought for it. This period was not simply survival. It was institution building under threat. Schools educated the next generation. Churches unified communities. Political participation reshaped local governments. In the shadow of intimidation, black communities did not retreat. They organized, defended, and advanced, proving that Reconstruction was not just a political era, but a grassroots movement for dignity and power. Reconstruction was not just about rebuilding the South, it was about redefining American citizenship. Between 1865 and 1870, 3 constitutional amendments reshaped the nation. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment prohibited denying black men the right to vote based on race. On paper, these changes were revolutionary. For the first time in U.S. history, black men held public office at local, state, and federal levels. In states like South Carolina and Mississippi, black legislators helped rewrite state constitutions, expand public education, and rebuild infrastructure. Figures such as Hiram Rhodes Revels and Blanche K. Bruce served in the U.S. Senate, an unthinkable reality just years earlier. But legal equality triggered organized resistance. White supremacist groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, used terror to undermine black political participation. Night raids, beatings, and assassinations targeted voters and office holders. Polling places became battlegrounds. Federal troops were sometimes deployed to enforce order, but protection was inconsistent and temporary. This contradiction defined Reconstruction: rights guaranteed in the Constitution, yet denied through violence and intimidation. Courthouses declared equality. Streets enforced hierarchy. The central question emerged: how could freedom exist legally yet be stripped away in daily life? The answer lay in power. Amendments could change law, but enforcement required sustained political will. As Northern commitment weakened in the 1870s, protection eroded. Reconstruction governments represented a brief, radical experiment in interracial democracy. It was bold, fragile, and fiercely contested. The fight was no longer about ending slavery, it was about whether equality under the law would survive resistance determined to reverse it. Reconstruction is often told through laws and political battles, but the era is best understood through the private words of the people who lived it. In letters preserved by the Freedmen's Bureau, formerly enslaved men and women wrote about missing children, unpaid wages, and violent threats from former masters. Many freed people dictated letters because they were only just learning to read and write. Their words were direct, urgent, and unfiltered. They asked for protection. They demanded justice. They searched for family members sold years before emancipation. One formerly enslaved man wrote to federal officials, describing how his employer refused to pay agreed wages. A black mother petitioned for custody of her children, taken during slavery and held by a white family after the war. These were not abstract political debates. They were daily battles over labor, safety, and family unity. Diaries from black Union veterans reveal another layer. Having fought for the Union, they returned home expecting citizenship to mean protection. Instead, many documented intimidation at polling stations and night riders targeting community leaders. Yet those same pages show determination plans to build schools, purchase land, and vote in the next election. Church records tell similar stories. Baptisms, marriages, and funerals were carefully documented, marking a new control over identity and dignity once denied under slavery. Even simple acts choosing a last name, signing a contract, attending school were declarations of autonomy. These personal records expose the emotional core of Reconstruction. Fear was constant, violence was real, but so was hope. These were people who had tasted freedom and refused to surrender it. Their quiet resilience, written in letters, preserved in archives, reshaped American democracy not through grand speeches, but through daily courage under pressure. Reconstruction did not fail quietly, it was dismantled. By 1877, federal troops withdrew from the South, marking the political end of Reconstruction. Protections weakened. White supremacist governments regained control. What followed was the rise of Jim Crow laws, segregation, voter suppression, and racial terror that would shape American life for nearly a century. The constitutional amendments remained in place, but enforcement faded. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation effectively stripped black citizens of voting rights, despite the 15th Amendment. The promise of equal protection under the 14th Amendment narrowed through court decisions and local resistance. Legal freedom survived, practical equality did not. Yet the foundations built during Reconstruction did not disappear. Black churches, schools, and mutual aid networks endured. Political organizing continued beneath the surface. The memory of holding office, voting, and shaping state governments did not vanish. It became historical proof that interracial democracy had once existed in the South. Decades later, civil rights leaders drew directly from this unfinished era. The legal arguments used in the 20th century's civil rights movement relied heavily on the Reconstruction amendments. When activists demanded voting rights in the 1960s, they were not asking for new privileges, they were demanding enforcement of rights granted a century earlier. This is the lasting truth. The post-Civil War struggle did not end in the 19th century. It shaped the battles of the 20th and continues to influence debates about citizenship, justice, and equality today. The Civil War may have ended, Reconstruction may have collapsed, but the fight for full equality did not disappear, it evolved. If this story moved you, comment below, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold historical stories. Freedom is not a single event in history. It is a long, unfinished journey.